Today we've got a great malicious compliance story all about 24/7 hotel supervision. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, you want to micromanage 30 people? Sir, yes sir. My girlfriend was having issues with her micromanaging boss and made me remember this orchestrated malicious compliance we did back around 2003 to 2004 when I was working for a consulting company. The client we were working for was a bank that had us working from the second-level basement, which consisted on a warehouse full with ATM replacement parts and another retrofitted warehouse with desks for us. You can imagine the type: flickering neon lights, ventilation columns. Only thing resembling a window was a poster of a window that the consulting company hung up on the wall. Cell phones weren't that common then. Internet was kinda on, but everything was blocked because of the bank's firewall. We had to access Google via IP address. Working there was hard. Only distraction was having a talk around the water cooler and going upstairs to get a coffee. We were like 30 people, split into two big teams doing COBOL, with one smaller one doing web, .NET, and whatever else somebody asked the manager to deliver. I was part of the smaller one. The client asked us to track how long it took to finish each task. This was handled by each of the three team leaders, and people had a little leeway on how to report hours spent. So each team member would tell team leader whatever a task was finished and how long it took. It worked pretty well because team leaders were chill and the guys were serious and didn't slack much. The manager, let's call him micromanager since he was all about micromanaging but also because he was short as freak, calls me one. I was kinda jack of all trades back then. And my team leader, TL as in team leader but also he was tall as freak, so too long, one day and says, "Look guys, I have a feeling we're not working hard enough. I need to be able to report the exact amount of time we spend on each task to the client. I want you to have some kind of software so people can input the time they spend on each thing." Team leader tries to explain that the current system in place works rather well and there's no need to change the status quo, that the numbers were accurate and such. Micromanager says that that's not enough, that people are wasting time and he wants accurate tracking. I was like 22 or 23 at that time, first job, but too long, had a knack for malicious compliance. So he designed the system. It consisted on a little traffic light in the taskbar. Red meant you were assigned, yellow meant a temporary stop, green meant unassigned. In order to change from one color to the other, a pop-up appeared and you had to input the reason for the change. Then we created a web page that summarized and presented the data anonymously. It also had an export button so Micromanager could check and use it to report himself faster than how the team leaders were doing it. At least that was Micromanager's idea. We installed this in every computer and showed how it worked to Micromanager. He was happy and told us to explain the system to the team in order to start the trial run of the idea right away. So we did. Team leader gathered every single team member and told them that Micromanager wanted an exact tracking of each one. He repeated time and time again the word exact, like probably 50 times in 5 minutes. He also said that the next day would be a trial run for the software. So 30 team members understood right away and complied in an exact way. Here's an example on some of the things I remember. I might remember some of these ones a little embellished, it's been a while, as highlights from the report with time added up after the trial day. Arrival. Taking coat off, no hanger available, tried to hang it on top of other coat, both fell, 5 minutes. Cough attack, had to get a glass of water, 5 minutes. Joke, morale booster, 2 minutes. Lost track of thought, realized I was looking at the poster of a window instead of a window, 3 minutes. Gone to the toilet. This was like 400 minutes or so, 30 people, 2 times in the day or so. Discussing last night's football match, 50 minutes. Air too cold, had to ask maintenance to up the temp, 4 minutes. Somebody asked temp to up the temp, now everybody is sweating, had to ask them to lower temp, 2 minutes. Inputting change of state in traffic light app, something like 2 hours in total, and the list kept going and going and going. The real data was also there, but it was practically unusable. Before leaving the office, team leader called his team and we had a really good laugh reading the list. The next day, when we arrived, Micromanager called team leader, told him something and team leader asked me to uninstall the traffic light app from every computer. Anytime I've ever heard a story of anybody trying to implement these very specific time tracking procedures, it just never seems to go well. And I think it's pretty easy to understand why. You don't want to have to track every little minute thing you do. I mean, obviously, malicious compliance was running rampant here. Nobody needs to know how long you spent on the toilet. Well, actually, to be fair, I've heard stories where they actually do want to know when you go to the toilet and how long, which is kind of weird. But in general, it just seems like the kind of thing you shouldn't have to track. I mean, let's try to agree what somebody does when they go to the bathroom between them and their crack, they should not track. As long as you haven't committed an atrocity, wash your hands and nobody needs to know about that stuff. Frolicking T commented, lost track of thought, realized I was looking at the poster of a window instead of a window, 3 minutes. This one got me. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy awesome stories of malicious compliance, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below. That said, our next story is doing exactly what I was told. I used to work as a driver for a freight company. We used to handle awkward-sized items that no other couriers would touch. We delivered everything from coffins to tractor parts. We also had to collect things from our customers for delivery the next day. This company had a mixture of contractors and permanent drivers. I was a relief driver. I knew most of the routes, so I covered holidays or sickness. The management of the depot consisted of a delivery manager and a collection manager. These two people didn't quite see eye to eye, as sometimes getting the stuff delivered conflicted with getting stuff collected, and their targets reflected failures in a bad way. This particular day, I had to cover a contractor's route. I didn't know the route, so as we had to load our trucks, this took a little longer than usual. I had around 45 deliveries that day, which is high for this predominantly rural route. I asked my manager, the delivery manager, if he knew the route. He replied that he did and ordered my route for me, so I was good to go, albeit a bit late. I did say that with the volume I had, I may struggle, and I asked him to keep an eye out for me. He said okay. I got to near midday and realized that I wasn't going to be able to complete all the deliveries and the collections wouldn't get done either. I also noted that one of the collections was off route and the contractor had a vehicle in that area anyway. I called in and spoke to my manager, delivery, and told him he had a choice of collections or deliveries. I also asked why the contractor couldn't cover the off-route collection. I was told to call back later and he'll see if he can sort something out. He also said that the off-route collection would have to be done too. I called back later and asked for help again. He said there was no help available, so I gave him the option of deliveries or collections as there wasn't time to do both. I will get to the time a bit later. He categorically said both had to be done. The delivery manager went home, so I called in again and got the collection manager. She reiterated that there was no help at all, so either I failed the deliveries or failed the collections. If that happened, I'd have been hauled into the office the next day, so cue malicious compliance. I called into one of the collections and I asked what time they closed. 6:30 p.m. they said, so I said I'd be back later. I carried on with the deliveries, which took me further away from that collection. At the appropriate time, I stopped delivering and drove to the collection. I collect 2 small parcels. That was all. I then drove back to where I had stopped and carried on delivering. This cost me about an hour. I finished my last delivery at 7:15 p.m. I had a 45-minute drive back to my yard. As I was leaving the round, I got a frantic call from the collection manager. She was wondering where I was. I told her what had happened and told her that I'd asked for help 4 times and was told I had to do everything allocated, so I did, and it wasn't my fault that it happened like this. Here's where the trouble really started. The company's trunking system is a fluid one. It depends on trucks leaving the depot at a certain time. For our depot, the cutoff time is 7:30 p.m. I wheeled in at just after 8 p.m. There were 15 ticked off guys on overtime waiting for me to turn up and an articulated truck waiting for these 2 parcels. This wait caused the whole trunking system to be late the next day. My route was discussed when I got back, as it was questionable at best. When I told the collections manager that it was the delivery manager that organized it, there were angry emails between the delivery and collection managers, and I would imagine that the logistics team would have demanded an explanation too. Butts were definitely kicked. The next day, no one said a word. I wasn't on that route, and going forward, well, for a little while, they either helped when I asked or didn't get me to do as much. Also, as I had exceeded legal driving time, they had to make sure I went home early for a few days, so a bit of a win there. The biggest trouble these guys had was they always assumed that the drivers were after an easy day, and even when presented with the evidence, assumed that you were still trying to be fly. This time it bit them badly. Doing a delivery job is really a very thankless job, not just because it's a super demanding job. I mean, you've got to constantly be on the move, you've got to be ready to pick up a 50-pound box, and surprise, surprise, it's at this apartment complex 5 flights up. But also, how dare you not be capable of defying every currently known law of the universe and being able to get multiple things done in multiple different places miles apart all at the same time? OP added an extra story commenting, "At another company, they were continually giving us all more than we could deliver. This was to simply get the freight out of the yard. We all brought stuff back. In the morning, you would collect your paperwork, and the guys in the office would badmouth the guys that brought stuff back and be saying things like, 'They need firing,' etc. You would walk out and think, 'I brought more back, what are they saying about me?' So one day, I thought I would deliver everything they gave me. 9 p.m., I got a call that went like this. The office said, 'Where are you?' I replied, 40 miles away, and I got 4 more left. The office said, 'Stop what you're doing right now and get your butt back to the yard. Do you know what the time is?' I reply, 'Yes, but I have 4 more to do.' They say, 'Get back here now.' It didn't get me any less stuff to do. I did have an easier next day though, and it at least gave them something to bench about." Our next story is following the process. Before I became a manager at another location, I worked in a store and we had a mechanic who had done something which was stupid and against the rules, but it turned into being blown out of all proportion. He was out on a road test in a customer's car after finishing some work and he stopped off in a shop to buy something. It was against the rules to use customers' cars for personal use, even on a road test. His manager was fairly new to the role and the mechanic knew he was going to be in trouble but did not think it would be a big deal, as in the past it would most likely be a telling off as a verbal warning or possibly a written warning. This mechanic was very good and very productive and made them lots of money, so they couldn't afford to get rid of him. However, the new manager decided that he would go all official and hold a full disciplinary meeting. The mechanic asked me if I would act as someone to go in with him, take notes, etc., which was allowed. Beforehand though, I did try and speak to the manager and suggest this all could be dealt with. However, he said he was following the process and expected everyone to do the same. I then spoke to the mechanic and got the background and what had gone on in the investigation meeting beforehand, which I realized had been mishandled also. The next day, there was an office with 2 people from HR who had traveled a long way to this meeting. I said to the mechanic, "Just go along with it, as I indicate." So the HR people and the manager are there, and so are the both of us, and the manager starts to go off about what had happened and that he'd been seen by the customer stopping off to buy a drink in the local shop. He then went on about rules and procedures, and this went on and on. At the end of it, I asked if we could take a break for a bit, which they agreed to, and then we went back, and to make the point, he decided to bring in another mechanic to confirm they knew the policy, which he said he did. And I said that I could not be sure that everyone did, so one by one they brought each mechanic up and asked them, and also stated on did they know what the accused had done, etc., etc. Fully smug at what the manager had proved, I again asked for a break as this had been going on for some time. Of course, HR agreed and I made them wait a good 20 minutes before we went back. At this point, one of the HR people were getting frustrated at the amount of time this was taking and then asked the mechanic, "So what do you have to say for yourself? You did know the rules and you did stop off?" "Yes," said the mechanic. "I know it was wrong and I'm sorry for breaking the rules." The HR person looked stunned and said, "So why did you say you did not?" "I never did," said the mechanic. At no point did he ask me if I had done it, only that he had to follow the process. At which point the second HR person said, "No one asked you what you had to say about it?" "No, he did not," the mechanic answered. At that point, they did not look best pleased. I was trying hard not to laugh at it all and looked down at my notes so they couldn't see my face. The HR person said, well, a verbal warning would go on the file, not to do it again, and we could leave the room, and they thanked me for my taking part. We all got up to leave, but they said to the manager to stay behind, and I closed the door and listened while I could hear them giving the manager a hard time over the waste of time. The next day, when the manager ran off the productivity report, it was really bad, as all the time lost by the other mechanics while they gave their evidence. I would have loved to see him have to explain that one to his bosses. He avoided HR where possible after that, and never asked me to follow the process again. I will say, considering that they were the new manager, is it really a bad thing that they decided to try to follow this by the process? Could they have been better? Could they have been a cooler boss about it? Sure. But they are the new guy, and it is kind of about just like setting a standard that don't disrespect me, right? Like don't stomp all over me. I think just as much as that manager's not going to go to HR and go through the process the next time, it's probably a lot less likely that the engineer is going to stop off at a store and grab a soda, right? Lit Salmon commented, "Just had something similar happen. I was representing a fellow employee as their shop steward over an issue involving sick leave. Management said the employee couldn't use sick leave for the reason she used it for. In a meeting with HR and store manager for almost an hour arguing policy with them, finally, I said that I didn't understand how they could deny the sick leave after it was already approved by another manager per policy. At this point, the HR person said they didn't realize it had been approved and that the employee would be granted sick leave. Communication is astonishingly horrible at times at my job." Our next story is HR and payroll manager asked to automate their decisions away. In my first job, I worked in IT as an access and permissions administrator at a large company with significant technological debt. The environment included custom software dating back to the Windows 9X and even DOS era. Initially, the work was quite tedious, involving a lot of back and forth communication between multiple departments. We had to ensure that each employee had the necessary training and documentation to access data in the scope requested by their manager. Additionally, we needed approval from the manager of the department related to the system role in question. On top of that, the company's excessive paper-only bureaucratic workflow made the work go at a snail's pace. A single SAP account for a blue-collar worker required at least 3 forms signed by different people. The heads of departments responsible for signing those papers didn't feel any urgency to send them to us quickly. A good example of this is when I, myself, waited over 2 weeks after being hired in the IT department before my first account was set up. Until then, I only had a guest account that allowed me to access the main internal website with the company's procedures, regulations, and other basic information. Up to this point, each signed form had to be physically delivered to us, which was agonizingly slow given that the company had multiple branches. We decided to automate away the paperwork. Our first step was to allow the use of scanned documents. It was a partial success. While it eliminated the courier delays, management still required us to sign the physical copies afterward, which we mass stamped at the end of each month. The next step was to introduce a fully electronic workflow. We faced significant resistance from upper management, so we had to settle on a system that mostly replicated the existing paper processes. Despite this, it was a game changer. We created presets that managers could select and customize as needed, using data from these customizations to create better fitting presets. We also developed workflows that automatically generated and assigned sub-tickets for necessary approvals and tracked how long it took, sending reminders if needed. And finally, we got an approval from HR to access layoff data to generate user block or removal tickets. Sometime after we rolled out the new system, the HR/payroll manager made a big fuss. She was furious that her team was still waiting weeks to get their permissions and questioned whether all our work had been for nothing. That really struck a chord with me. Inside, I was overjoyed, but I did my best to keep a neutral expression. At that time, we were working on summary reports with burn down and bottleneck charts, and I already knew that tickets requesting HR or payroll access were spending over most of their lifespan waiting for her or one of her sub-managers to approve them. The manager immediately went on the defensive, claiming she couldn't keep up with the amount of tickets. She then requested a change. She wanted any request from her employee to be automatically approved within the relevant scope of their sub-department. For example, a request for an HR worker to have full HR access and limited payroll access would be automatically approved for HR access, but not for payroll, and vice versa. I was skeptical, but wasn't exactly in a position to argue. I asked my boss to join the discussion and explained that the goal was to prevent overly permissive approvals that could lead to unauthorized access. I tried to convince her to brainstorm together potential edge cases before making a blanket approval, but she was already set on her decision and wasn't interested in discussing details. My boss shrugged and said it would be her responsibility. He told her to write up an official document outlining the change, and we would proceed with the implementation. The only request we had was to include a line that each such request would still be created, assigned to as normal, and marked as automatically approved by name of the main HR/payroll manager decision. I uploaded the scan into our system and, anticipating that it would eventually backfire, made a photocopy to keep it handy in the top drawer of my desk. The original copy went to the archive. A few weeks later, she stormed into our room. The speed with which she flung open the door made it clear she was furious. She demanded to know why we had granted full access to payroll data to her subordinate. I think it was the only time I ever heard anyone yell in the company. I calmly reminded her of her request to automatically approve in-department access requests. She wasn't having it, explaining that one of her low-ranking subordinates from the payroll subdepartment had accessed the salaries of everyone in their department, including managers, and was unhappy with the paycheck disparity. Isn't that obvious that they shouldn't be able to do that? Well, yeah, to a human, but that decision was automated away by your request. I handed her a copy of the document she had signed, which instructed us to automatically approve any and all such tickets without exception. Immediately afterward, she asked us to roll back the change while she wrote up another document to cancel the previous one. In the following days, she meticulously reviewed all those tickets and requested us to reduce access for several users. I have to admit, she did a thorough job and kept up a good pace in reviewing new requests, doing it daily instead of once every week or two as before. In the end, we managed to distill a subset of permissions that could be approved automatically and proceeded to implement a similar approach with other departments. P.S. I don't know whether that payroll employee managed to get the raise, but I'm sure they weren't fired, as we didn't receive any tickets to block or remove any accounts from that department in the following months. So, come on, we can't blame that person, right? If you find yourself in a situation when you're working in a place and you see this little pop-up that says payroll info of not just all your coworkers but the manager above you, and all you gotta do is just press that button, all the numbers will pop right up and just reveal themselves to you. All of a sudden, curiosity really does kill the cat, and I ain't no cat. DJ Todd242 commented, "Once at the dawn of time, early 90s, I saw a spreadsheet of all of the salaries in the company I worked for at the time. I really wish I hadn't." Shay B123 commented, "I found a list of salaries of all my boss's direct reports that he left on the copier. I discovered that I made significantly less than my coworkers who had similar or reduced responsibilities and had the same tenure. I took it to my boss, told him I saw the disparity, and he needed to address it quickly. He said there was nothing he could do about it, and it was what it was. I updated my resume and started taking days off, going on interviews. When he asked me why I was taking time off, I told him I was looking for a company that valued me and paid me appropriately. He got very pale and left my office. I continued interviewing. A few days later, I received an off-schedule, very large raise." Our next story is, who is really watching the clock? Backstory, I used to work in hotels years ago. The hotel I worked at has a policy where there must be at least one staff member at the hotel 24/7. I worked the unenviable but fireproof position of part-time front desk and relief night audit, so I never knew when I was going to be working. 16-hour shifts were uncommon but expected of me when the main night audit called in sick. The story, I had a middle manager who got bored and liked to ruffle feathers for entertainment. Annoying, but I only had to deal with it for 2 to 3 days a week because no one else wants to cover the night audit, so I suck it up and deal. They also loved to sleep in and would routinely call in late in the mornings. I really couldn't stand them, but they were my boss, so after giving the essential information and passed the torch from the night audit to the morning manager and crew, I clocked out promptly and got out of the line of fire. So I thought. I get a call waking me up at 11 a.m. because I was sleeping off my graveyard shift that night. I was told to report to the hotel for a disciplinary meeting that includes middle manager and the general manager of the hotel, my boss's boss. I asked them what the meeting was about, and they replied that it was due to my excessive use of overtime. I then asked them if I could come in before my shift that night so that I could actually get some sleep for my next graveyard shift. They replied that I would have to arrive within the hour. It took me 30 minutes to drive to get there, or they would tack on insubordination or some other nonsense to my file as well. I needed the job for rent, so I complied and got to the hotel half asleep. As I'm driving, I'm trying to figure out how to explain away the nice overtime additions on my paycheck. Took me a solid 10 minutes, but I remembered that the middle manager had yet to actually show up on time for the past month. That wakes me up more, and I show up to the meeting absolutely cheerful and smiling, much to the displeasure of the GM and my boss. Boss goes on a tirade about how abusing company time is horrible in many different ways. I no longer have my crap-eating grin, but I am also unfazed by the dressing down and let them blow out their steam that was likely put on them by payroll or HR about how my paychecks were getting too fat for their liking. This is confirmed by a shorter but more professional dressing down by my GM about me costing the company excess money and that I should know better because I run the hotel's books. I calmly state that all of the overtime statements were true and that I would like to compare my punch times to the staffing schedule and the start and end times of the people I was relieving in the evening and who was relieving me in the morning. I explained to them that I was only staying on until the next crew relieved me and I had sufficient time to brief the incoming crew per the corporate policy of the hotel must be manned 24/7. They do, and they say that there's only a 3 to 5 minute overlap between my shift and the person relieving me. GM looks ticked, and middle manager went from smug to looking like they got their hand caught in the cookie jar as their clock-ins showed usually 7-ish and sometimes even 7:30 when their start time was 6. I was then told by the GM that they would reimburse me for the minutes to drive to and from the hotel, as well as the duration of the meeting, and that the write-up was being dropped in light of new information. Fallout, middle manager still made my life miserable until I left, but at least they never gave me grief about overtime after that, and actually started showing up to work at 6 a.m. and not snooze until 7. My paychecks were less, but at least I got more sleep because I now was better able to beat the morning commute at the end of my shift. Edit, I knew my paychecks were coming in hefty for my wage. I never made a stink about staying late because hotels pay maybe 5 cents more than minimum wage if you work graveyard shifts. I kept my mouth shut about my check. I needed that extra cash and dealt with a sleep deprivation for the almost guaranteed additional hour of overtime at the expense of a lazy and petty boss. I had my moment of how do I save myself on the way to work and was conveniently able to throw my rabble-rousing manager under the bus in one go. I mean, I think OP has to be glad that this was all actually very well documented, because if they just had assigned shifts and switching off was kind of more of a trust me that I'm reporting the correct hours, but I don't actually have any kind of documentation that proves it, and it becomes this hearsay battle, that's probably not going to work out great in OP's favor. It's almost actually kind of funny that they would just automatically assume OP must be stealing time rather than just willingly working a lot of overtime for the hotel. We know how little we pay you. You can't possibly just be doing all that work. Snoo Regrets 1386 said, as a former graveyard worker, 7 to 11, it really grinds my gears when the employers expect you to attend mandatory meetings or training in the middle of sleepy time. They know your hours. Expecting employees that are coming off an all-nighter to be at work 4 hours after you've gone home is bonkers. Night shift working already screws with your sleep. I've known people that left to go home and never made it because they fell asleep while driving. Sleepy driving is equivalent to drunk driving. Waiting for someone to show up so you can go home is difficult and double when they're consistently late. Had a girl following my shift that was always 10 to 15 minutes late, or just called at shift time to claim they can't get an Uber. It's been over 2 years since I worked there and just want to say, hey Keithra, get a bike. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.